So welcome to Biology 112 and our lecture that's going to discuss these fields of systematics, phylogenies, and a little bit about comparative biology. What we're going to do with this chapter and the beginning of this unit is talk about how we organize life. I mean, there's a lot of life out there. Depending on what you consider living versus non-living, the numbers vary. But in general, when we use the term biodiversity, it's used to describe or to be used for discussing the variety of life on Earth. How much is out there? That's a great question, and the answer is a moving target. The number is constantly changing as we discover new species. Great question to pose right now, and I want you guys to start thinking about it. When we genetically engineer something, does that make it a new species? What do we want to use as a definition of species? These are all things we'll talk about. But in the big picture, generally, we recognize 1.8 million different species that have been identified by scientists. Now, what's really fun and crazy, is that depending upon how you define species, and again, the criteria we'll talk about in a bit here, this opens up the potential for us to have anywhere from 10 to 15 million species on Earth. So we've only scratched the surface when we talk about species. If we have 1.8 million that have been identified, and let's go on the low side, there's 10 million out there. Okay, we found less than 20%. There's still so much to find out, so much to discover. I encourage you, as biologists, look at diversity. Diversity is essential for healthy ecosystems and stability. The less diversity, the more prone to extinction or disruption or breakdown communities are going to face. So we want biodiversity. It's incredibly, incredibly important. So we'll get into this as we go through the units and as we go to the end of the semester and we talk about conservation. It circles back and it's all about preserving as much biodiversity as possible. All right, so the challenge, though, is what fits into this biodiversity category? Well, anything that's alive. In general, we use the following criteria to identify living things. We say, all right, first of all, the organism, whatever it may be, has to be organized. Generally, we say a cell is the smallest unit of life. From there, it builds up. Cells, in some cases, create tissues, tissues to organs, organs to systems, and then you have your living individual. But life can exist as a single cell. Sometimes it stops there. Bacteria, the prokaryotes, the archaeas, fungi, some different algae and protists, they're single cells, but their cell is organized. All living things need energy. They're going to use energy in some form, some fashion. Now, it may be they photosynthesize, maybe they run respiration, but every living thing needs a form of energy. Uh-oh, I'm going to run out of room here. Sorry, I got to fix that. Living things will respond to stimuli. Poke it, prod it, touch it. It should move, it should respond. Maybe it grows towards the light. Maybe it grows towards dark. Maybe it moves in response to a certain smell. Living things respond to stimulus. You do not need neural systems to respond to stimulus. Think about the plants growing in this picture next to, on the right-hand side there. They will grow towards the sunlight. There's no neural system there at all, but they respond to the stimulus. Living things can reproduce. No. They have the genetic ability to pass on their traits. Now, it could be asexual reproduction or it could be sexual, depends on the species. Truly adaptable things can bounce back and forth. That's a huge, huge advantage. If you can go back and forth and reproduce sexually when conditions are bad, and then asexually when conditions are good, awesome, thumbs up, you're more adaptable. And that brings us to our last major feature. Living things can adapt, they can adjust, they can modify to survive. As the species adapts over time, the species will evolve. But you have to be alive to pass on your genetics to the next generation in order for evolution to occur. All right, so we use these features to say, okay, this makes you alive. This makes you a living organism. Now, how do we organize you? Because there's stuff that's similar, it looks the same, it acts the same, it kind of does a lot of the same things, but is it the same species or is it a different one? So this is what the fields of systematics, phylogenies, and all these different disciplines help us figure out. It helps us organize these things. So systematics, this is get this in the right spot. Systematics is a field in which people who study systematics, they classify organisms and determine their evolutionary relationships. Okay? So what I want you guys to be doing as we're going through the lectures is don't just watch me fill in the blanks, write it in yourself. That's the active learning part of the course I want you to be responsible for. So all of your PowerPoints are going to be similar to this. There's going to be blanks in them. Fill them in, whether you do it by hand, you print them off, write them out, or you do it, type them in like I am. Do that. That helps you retain this information much better than just watching me fill it in and listening to the lecture. So the more modes of learning we are doing as we're learning, the more likely we are to learn. You're seeing it, you're hearing it, and then if you're writing it out, you're now kinesthetic, which I'd be willing to bet the majority of you guys are kinesthetic learners. You learn by doing. This is your doing, okay? You need to fill the notes in by hand, making notes, again, whether it's on a piece of paper, it's in your notebook, or on the PowerPoint here, that's completely up to you, but fill in these blanks, all right? All right, so let's keep going. Systematics. We're classifying organisms and determining their evolutionary relationship. So to do this, scientists use things like fossil records, molecular data, genetic data, and they use all these pieces of the puzzle to put together an evolutionary relationship. Now, once we think we have the relationship figured out, we create what's known as a phylogeny. So I want to put something up here just to help really, really try to keep this clear. Oh. Okay, so systematics is a field of study. Actually, I could just do this. All right, so it's a field of study or a discipline within science, biology, etc. Uh-oh, get that guy out of the way. Give us some room here. All right, now phylogeny. What a phylogeny is an evolutionary, I don't need bold, hold on here. Okay, so a phylogeny is an evolutionary history of a species. Oh, sorry about the typos here. History of a species or group of related species. So basically it's your family tree. Who's related to whom? Within the family, how is this family connected to that family? But we do this with species. So how are crocodiles and birds related? How are jaguars and horses related? How are humans and gorillas related? How are all humans related, etc.? This is the idea behind phylogeny. So the systematics helps us figure this out. That's that field of study. And the phylogeny is the actual representation of it. So we often, I'm going to put this in quotes, we often represent a phylogeny with a tree, the little evolutionary tree you may have seen at some point or be familiar with. So sometimes you'll see stuff like this. Let me pick a good color. Let's go with blue. So you get this little evolutionary tree that does this, and it has these branches. And we're going to talk about all this, and I'll do examples, and you guys will be doing some of these as well. So this is the idea. Here's the ancestor down here. The ancestor gave rise to these two branches. The one that went this way, the one that went this way. This ancestral group, we'll call it B, then gave rise to this one and this one. That produced C and D. This line gave rise to these two groups, and so on. So we have maybe C, D, E, F, and G, all these species running around Earth right now. They're all related, and we can trace their common ancestral relatedness. That's what this field is all about. So the really, really fun part about systematics is it's always changing. If you like stuff that's changing and learning new things, explore the field of systematics. It's, like I said, molecular data, holy cow, has just exploded what we can do with this field. It gives us so much new information, and it's causing us to reassess things. That is a good thing in science, to reassess and say, maybe we need to rethink this. This is what we've known for all these years, but maybe we need to figure this out and look at this differently and reassess it. Okay? So here's just an example of what we have. So the actual tree itself is known as a cladogram. And what we can see here is this information is presented in just different versions, but it all says the same thing. So if you look at this version 1, humans and chimps are connected at number 1. Version 2, humans and chimps are connected at number 1. Version 3, humans and chimps are connected at number 1. It says the same thing. It's just presented in slightly different arrangements, but the connection between humans and chimps is always that number 1. Then the human-chimp group is connected to gorillas at the number 2. Same thing here, same thing here. All right, then we get the orangutan coming in here, and then lastly, the least connected to all these other primates is the gibbon. Right, so what we're looking at are just different representations of the phylogeny, of this cladogram, this little tree here. So we need to keep this in mind when we're looking at this and interpreting this. There's a big key to understanding this tree. Look at how recently species is connected to the common ancestor. Let me clean this up a little bit. All right, I'm going to change font size just to make it a little easier to see all this. So that is the key to understanding phylogeny. How recently connected are two species? That tells you their degree of relatedness. So that's the whole key. I don't care if you're looking at version 1, 2, or 3, they all say the same thing. Humans and chimps are the closest related. Then you go to the next closest, which would be the gorilla. Then the orangutan. Least related is the gibbon. So look at the connections. Look at what we call the fork or the branch point. That's this little number 1 here, the 2, the 3. Those are branch points. Right? So that's what we really, really have to pay attention to when we're looking at phylogenies and trying to look at the connections here. Right? So what we're going to do then is use a system or a method known as cladistics. So let me put this in here. So cladistics is a method. Okay, so what I want you to do now is click on the link here. Click on the link here that says Systematics Part 2, and that will take you to the second part of this lecture. We'll see the same pattern throughout all of the lectures.